So which lens is better? The Laowa 12mm F2.8 or the new Sony 14mm F1.8 G Master? Let's get into it. Hey creators, Aimon here, and this is where I help you master your creative mindset. And in this episode, I'm going to be comparing these two lenses and my experience with both of them. I'm going to go over the pros and the cons and which one I'm actually going to keep and which one I'm going to sell. So I've had the Laowa 12mm for almost 2 years now, and I've been using it to shoot primarily real estate. Otherwise just some other cool stuff for myself, a bunch of B-roll. It's a very unique lens because it's 12mm. Now that's the widest prime lens that you can get for Sony mount. And in short, I have loved it. Now I picked this up based on a recommendation from Josh Yo from Make Art Now, and he recommended it based on, him shooting a bunch of real estate on the Sony a7 III, which is what I was doing as well. And it gave me a distinct advantage because, nobody was using a lens this wide. There's a lot of people, in the real estate video niche where I'm from in Brisbane, and it's pretty crazy, the competition, but, probably as wide as most people go is actually 16. And if you think about it, that's, almost 30% wider in terms of a field of view. And this lens just really makes things look epic. It's so wide, in fact, that it can be too wide in some instances, but, if it is too wide, then I just swap to an 85 or another lens, maybe 24, right? But to make rooms look really big and, homes look really epic, again, this is just a fantastic lens. Now, yes, it's only 2.8, you might say, but for those of you shooting on an a7S III like me, you just swap the ISO to 12,800, which is, the second base ISO, and it cleans it up, and you can then stop it down to 5.6 or something like that, So I don't even think the 1.8 is actually insanely necessary. I've survived very well with this, and in situations where it is actually too dark, and I'll show some of these examples as well, then I just pop it to Picture Profile 6 and Cine 2, which handles it really well in the dark anyway. Do a bit of noise reduction in post, and you can barely tell the difference between that and an S-Log shot at night sometimes. The other thing that I love about this lens is the infinity focus. You just set it to that, and you know that pretty much everything is going to be in focus. So this has been my main prime in real estate. So the only thing about this is that it does feel like it lacks a little bit of character, this lens. A lot of the Sony lenses, like the 24 that I'm using right now, that's definitely my favorite lens. It just has a lot of character to it. It's pretty hard to describe, but this one, it just feels a little bit bland, And it was only a couple of weeks ago that the 14 actually became available in Australia and was actually in stock. Yes, we get it a fair bit later than pretty much anyone else. So I decided, I better pick this up just to see how it compares to the Laowa. Now the obvious advantages are that yes, this is f1.8, so that stops down quite well, and it's also much smaller and lighter as well. And that is something that I'm all about in my kit, is keeping it nice and light and efficient, and effective. And so to have this lighter than this lens, which is pretty chunky, is huge to, keep my kit nice and light. So I've spent about 3 weeks shooting with this lens. I've done twilights, I've done day shoots, in all sorts of environments and weather conditions. And it became time to actually compare this one with the Laowa. And I've been putting this off for a fair bit because I thought that as soon as I whacked this on, it would be a no-brainer. I'd be done with the Laowa. That's it, sell it, don't even have to make this video. But the reason I am making this video is because there isn't one out there at the moment, and it was really, really hard to actually decide. First of all, this is much cleaner image. It's sharper, okay? I'll give it that. It's sharper all the way to the corners, for sure. It definitely has much better resolution across the whole image. But when it comes to real estate, or maybe even astrophotography, the 14mm element, which if you think about it, is 15% tighter than the 12mm, because when you're getting down to these, this level of wide, that's actually a lot. And you'll be seeing some of the examples that I'm showing on screen right now. But as soon as I put the lens on, that was the thing that actually stopped me, because I felt like I was so restricted. I was actually so tight in comparison to that 12mm. It just shows so much more context of the home. And while it can, push it to be a little bit unrealistic almost, from the perspective of people buying and selling homes, again, it's about increasing the perceived value of the home. And if someone thinks that it's going to be a bigger room, then they're more likely going to actually come along to that inspection, for example. And so feeling so restricted on that 14mm, which is, as I said, is 15% tighter than the 12mm. That just put me off a fair bit. So the 1.8 did actually come in clutch when I was on a twilight shoot, so it was a little bit darker. It actually allowed me to stay in S-Log3 when I was bumped up to that 12,800 ISO, and actually get all of my clips in S-Log3, which means the grade is going to be a little bit more seamless across the whole video, and I don't have to swap to any other different picture profile to stop it down, and then there's going to be more noise and all that jazz, But generally, I do want to keep it away from that 1.8. So even when I'm inside, for example, I do want to keep it, above 2.8, even sometimes for F4, 5.6, and again, that's when I pop up to that 12,800 ISO, because I don't really want a very shallow depth of field when I'm inside a home. So another advantage that I wasn't actually expecting was that because it's so light, it's obviously easier to balance on the gimbal, and therefore your gimbal's battery life lasts longer. So that's something that I didn't expect, because obviously the Laowa, it's a little bit heavier, and so it weighs the gimbal down, it takes a little bit more to balance, and the battery drains a little bit quicker. When it comes to autofocus, I didn't actually love that part of the lens. It's fantastic autofocus, some of Sony's best, obviously. And when you do want to focus on something in particular, but because it doesn't have an infinity focus, when you're closer to that f2.8, you do have to actually tap to focus on something every shot that you're getting, and then sometimes that focus does break. So it's just another thing that you actually have to worry about. When you're shooting a person, or when you're outside and you're shooting a large object like a home, then it does come in handy a little bit. But for the most part, for what I'm using it for, it actually is an extra thing that you have to worry about. Now, if this is astrophotography, for example, that might be perfect for you, though you might be using, manual focus for that as well. And the 1.8 will definitely come in handy for you, and 14mm should be plenty wide. I suppose I'm more talking about my experience with real estate. So there I was, I've used the Laowa for almost 2 years, and it's been a workhorse. I've absolutely loved this lens. And then I decided to buy the Sony lens just to see how it compares. And for reference, brand new in Australia, the Laowa is about $1,500, maybe $1,600, and the Sony is $2,000. So not actually that much different, but that could be the difference between you wanting to upgrade to the Sony or keeping it on a Laowa. So which lens am I going to keep? Well, this was the hardest decision I've ever made in my entire life. Okay, maybe a slight exaggeration, but it was a very hard decision to make. And the main reason was because of the difference between the 12 and the 14mm. Just that field of view, as I'm sure you've seen, in the examples that I've shown so far, it really is almost a deal breaker that, I want to keep the Laowa. But because of how clean and sharp across the whole image, and small and lightweight and easier to fit into my bag the Sony is, I am going to go with the Sony lens. It does also have obviously autofocus for when I need it, and stops down to f1.8 as well. So there you have it, guys. That's my review of the Laowa 12mm f2.8 versus the Sony 14mm f1.8 G Master. And if I was rolling in it, maybe I would keep both of these lenses. But I do like to keep a nice and efficient setup. It's really easy to just whip together. I'm not being held down by a bunch of different lenses, because filmmaking is technical enough. You don't need more stuff to just weigh you down, So I am going to sell this Laowa lens and keep the Sony lens. And I'm sure that, in 6 months, I'm going to look back and maybe even regret it, and maybe even jump back on it one day, just because I missed that 12mm, 14mm. It's crazy to say that that feels so tight, but it does just feel like such a tight frame. But as you can see, I was very conflicted because they're both fantastic lenses. So if you're in a position where maybe you're just getting started, or maybe you can find a deal on the Laowa secondhand online, like I'll be selling mine for, then I would totally recommend to jump on that lens. It might even save you like $1,000 and, stop you from fighting to find the Sony in stock. And when it comes down to it, nailing exposure and getting a good color grade is going to give you a much better image than just whacking on a more expensive lens. So there you have it. Hopefully this has been helpful to you, and hopefully this can help you in guiding your decision to make a purchase of one of these lenses, because I couldn't find any real info on this online. Thank you very much for watching this episode of Creative Philosophy, and I'll see you in the next episode.